Hello, mot mates. Ralphie in the Whiskey Bothy. Welcome. Pull up a seat, pour a dram, and make yourselves comfortable, because I am going to give you a very engaging, entertaining little titbit over the next 20 minutes of information pertaining specifically to a bottling which has been doing the rounds and is still available in the specialist whisky shops in the UK. Welcome to Ralphie Review 1085 extras, extra content, extra opinion, extra perspective, extra Ralphiness. Hey, it's what it's all about. And I've just reviewed this whisky. It's very heavily peated and it's very industrial, and it's called Living Souls 99 and 1. And it's a blended Scotch. But if I was to give you this glass right now and said, what do you think of this? There is no way you would even think that it was a blended whisky. It is far too phenolically intensely peated, and almost awkwardly so. There's something going on here, and I really want to explain what this bottling's all about, because I really think we're going to see more of this. And the more you're aware of it, the more you can engage in intelligence-led sourcing of what you buy, which is good whisky available at good prices, which is going to be overlooked by the passive consumer who's still being led by what they see discounted in Amazon and in the supermarket. I shall begin with a wee sip of whisky. This isn't opening up very well. It's very herbaceous, intense, bitter sage, bitterness in it. If you don't like bitterness in your palate, you're going to struggle with this one. But bitterness goes very well with heavily peated whisky. And this is a heavily peated whisky, which has certainly gone some distance in the casks. Now, excuse me, I'm going to get my hanky out and blow my nose, because I'm getting huge wafts of heavily peated stuff coming out that glass. So here is the narrative that is on the back of the bottle. This has got a series of clues on it, a series of little Easter eggs around the label, which starts to kind of let you see what's actually happening here. We'll go into the back label, and it says, "At Living Souls, we capture the mysterious art of whisky making, where beyond the science of production lies the inexplicable creation of flavour and release limited edition small batch spirit masterpieces." That's not really good grammar, actually. And release limited editions. It should say release of limited edition small batch masterpieces. Okay, moving on, because we're getting some spin and blurb here. Right. This release is a phenomenal 3-year-old in exclamation marks, blended Scotch, and came about due to a happy accident. Yeah, sure it was. Where a hint of grain met a heavily peated island malt. Imagine yourself in a vibrant spice market, enveloped in rich sherried fruitiness and smoky aromas. The air is alive with dried orange, chili flakes, and spicy black pepper. Each sip draws you deeper into this sensory journey. Bear with me. I'm repeating. I mean, this is just... Of course it's pretentious, but it's a bit more than that. I'm coming to that shortly. Sensory journey. A touch of sea salt, tobacco and white pepper adds a sophisticated depth, making each moment a memorable exploration of taste. Non-chill filtered and natural colour, distilled, matured and bottled in Scotland by Whiskey Souls Limited, Glasgow. Right. It's getting through the hyperbole, the back of that label, but they're adding clues. Island malt, a small drop of grain. So it's predominantly single malt, and it's £55 a bottle, so that's really good value. What age is the malt? It's never disclosed. But when you go into the specialist whisky shop and you say, sell me something, and they bring you this and say, do you want to try it? And you try it, say, that's seriously aged and successfully aged, but it's super intense. What's actually going on here? It's not the spirit, it's the casks. There's something about the casks that are responsible for this, and I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, from my perspective, exactly what it is. There's clues in the front of the label too. Blended Scotch whisky. So they're selling this as a blend. Have you seen natural coloured 3-year-old blends, right? That colour? No, neither have I. That's a clue. 46.3% is Lechake 18-year-old peated whisky, official bottlings, bottled at 46.3%. Yes, not 46.4, not 46.2, but 46.3. So that's a cryptic clue. And it says mostly heavily peated. So they've got a 3-year-old blended Scotch which is mostly heavily peated. Really? How mostly? 99 and 1. 99% malt, 1% grain. So someone has gone, allegedly, I'm being cynical here. Bear with me, I'm being cynical. Even if they could be bothered, and they've gone with a wee teaspoon of grain whisky and they've gone, ooh, right. Of course, what they'll tell you is, well, these things happen now and again because the bottling plants are so busy and they just basically turn the wrong tap. They do this what they do. They turn the wrong tap and suddenly you go, oh my goodness, oh, heavens, crivens, help my bob. We've just put 1% of 3-year-old grain into 18-year-old single malt. Maltmates, my arse they have. My arse. I do not believe that for 1 minute. It is extremely rare for 3-year-old grain whisky to be bottled on its own. It just doesn't happen. It really doesn't. And to basically, what do you imagine is at the bottling plant that they've got 101 different taps and they're all juggling it like shuffling a pack of cards? No. This is deliberately done, and they've done it for a very specific reason. They're engaging in guerrilla marketing. Because they bought a number of barrels, sherry barrels, can tell, of aged Lechake 18-year-old. Big demand for it. I've reviewed one earlier this year, so it's available. We know for a fact Lechake 18-year-old is available to independent bottlers. But the thing is, independent bottlers get what they get. So they've got these casks. Send in the sherry casks. We'll get these 6 sherry casks, 8 sherry casks, 12 sherry casks. We'll make up a small batch of this. Could have been only 2 or 3. Probably is. And they say, well, hang about. What's this weird flavour coming off the cask? What? This isn't your nice, easy, accessible, recognisable Lechake 18-year-old. What's going on? Well, I'll tell you what. It certainly isn't the spirit itself. Because whether the spirit is for official bottlings or independent bottlings, all the spirit coming out of a distillery for casking is the same spirit, the same formula, the same stuff. So it must be down to the casks, at which point I bring out my big fat stave and we start to examine the cask forensics that could be responsible for this intensely, almost awkwardly heavily peated blended 3-year-old whisky. Now, it's not just Living Souls. If you know your whisky, you know the Thompson brothers are doing this guerrilla marketing thing at the moment, where they're playing cryptic clues and puzzle monsters with us. Where we've got to figure out whether the price we're paying is actually justified for the quality of the whisky that we're getting, which is in disguise in the bottling. It's the way it's going. It's a dangerous game to play if you don't err on the side of caution and you don't let your prices go too. You've got to keep the prices down in this. And Living Souls, to their credit, have put out what is 99% 18-year-old single malt, in my opinion, at a very, very attractive price. Why are they doing that? Because they want to sell the stuff. And why all the cryptic marketing? Because they know at some point the whisky faithful, the true enthusiasts, are going to spot it, notice it, and talk about it. And here I am. I'm not the only channel, by the way. I've noticed there's been a conversation on, what's it called? On other whisky channels. So here's a big fat stave. The reason it's a big fat stave is because it's got a bung hole in it, right? And you put there, do I have a bung handy? Yes, I do. It's a bit too small, but the bung sits in here, right? And it's made of poplar. That's the bung. Poplar wood, which is soft and springy. And that goes into this hole here, and it seals it up, particularly with a bit of hessian to bang it in. But if you're going to bang in bungs, you need strong staves. In other words, you need big staves with plenty of oak on either side, because if you don't, if it's a narrow stave, you run the risk of splitting the oak when you're hammering in the bung and having horrendous leaks. Now, the inside of the stave is interesting. As you can see, it's all black. The reason it's black is because that is covered in charcoal. It's covered in wood carbon. There are two ways to prepare a cask prior to putting whisky in it. And I'm talking virgin wood. One is to toast the cask, and the other is to char the cask. When you're toasting the cask, and I'll give you an example of that now. If I have one, yes I do. This is a charred cask. As you can see, I'll balance that there. I'll put that on top of it. And I'll peek through the hole at you and carry on talking. As you can see, the carbon on this big one is rougher. It's what's called alligator char. It is more dark, it's more intense. On this one, it's a lot lighter. This one has been toasted. So in other words, they put a flame into the cask after it's been assembled on basically an industrial blowtorch, and they superheat the interior of the cask without setting it on fire. And what it does is it caramelizes the sugar in the wood, and it removes the sappiness from green wood. This is done to a lot of wine casks because it helps oxidize and it helps give mature flavors into the maturing wine. And it's also a feature of in making cognac, using Lamazan cognac casks, that they will spend time and invest in deep toasting. So they'll put in a light toasting in the surface and a deeper toasting, they'll put a light toasting through well into the stave and then a deeper toasting in the top of it, but without generating too much carbon. Now, when you get to the other technique, it's called charring. And charring is much more dramatic and intense than toasting. This is where they actually put the barrel in end, they pour in some raw spirit, probably the foreshorts from the spirit still, and they basically set it in fire, and the interior of the cask burns with flames. The wood starts to burn. When it's burning, it gets burnt, and it heats up right into the wood rapidly, but on the inside of the stave, where it's on the surface, the internal surface, it actually carbonates dramatically into these little structures, which this is the common in the American bourbon industry. It's called alligator char, because the char looks like alligator skin because it's going so deep. And what it does is it absolutely burns and sterilizes, and it scorches, dramatically scorches the wood. Now, this is set in the picture here. Now, when The casks arrive at the cooperage to be sorted and distributed. The cooper will open up the bung, check the cask for its integrity, shine a torch inside and have a sniff. And particularly with sherry casks, a lot more with sherry casks than with bourbon casks, they will get sour notes, because what's happened is in the heat of Spain, in the warehouses of Spain, in the bodegas, where the casks have been stored for maybe a few months, the alcohol in the sherry being only 20%, unlike the 70% in bourbon, it tends to kind of evaporate out the casks a lot quicker. And as soon as the alcohol's gone, the bacteria move in and they start to consume the sugar, the residual sherry sugar syrup that's into the wood, and it sours the casks and it renders the casks no good. Because sour casks kill the flavour of whisky, and you're left with just a mess and undrinkable, unbottleable whisky. So what the coopers do is they say, let's knock the head off this cask, right? Remove it, bang off the metal rims, open it up, put in 3 litres of new make spirit, toss a match in, whoosh, off it goes, and it literally burns the bacteria right out of the infested cask. And then they leave it and they go for their tea break, and they come back and say, it's slightly over toasted, it's overcharred. Look at that alligator charge, that's heavy, heavy stuff. They say, never mind, just send it off to the distillery, business is business. And that's what they do. But you see, this char, it's not gone into virgin oak. The char has gone into a cask which has had previous content, and therefore it's not just charring the wood, it is charring the residual previous content, namely sherry, that's in the cask, that has been in the cask. And this is why, and this is natural colour, when you look at it, it's particularly dark. Added caramel E150A would never do that. It's too kind of fake tannish. This is genuinely deep mahogany, it's walnut. And that black note is in fact the carbon itself. So what's happened is you've got, particularly with deep char, and literally I can take my soda spoon and actually scrape off bits of char. I'll hold some up for you. Look, I'm sprinkling it down the cask, on the barrel here. So this char is about 2.5, 3 millimetres deep, and this is a light char. See the char in those casks? It's probably 4 or 5 millilitres thick. And it captures the smoke from the flames, from the burning. It actually overcooks the residual sherry, so the sugars turn into not just toffee but burnt toffee. You know, when you leave your toffee pan in the stove too long and it turns black and goes really bitter, that's what you're getting. But you could put a heavily peated whisky into those casks and you're going to get an interesting result. A demanding, intensely agricultural, industrial, fusile note, because it's not just the peatiness phenolics anymore, it's proactive cask phenolics added to the peat phenolics, which are just amplifying the whole thing even further than you would normally get if it was just down to the peat content in the spirit. And this makes for this fascinating industrial, steam engine, Victorian, steelworks, agricultural, tractors, farmyardies. There's so much going on in this umami savoury note, this intense bitter note, again, coming from the burnt wood. Not toasted wood, burnt wood. And this is my explanation from talking to retired coopers in bars in Glasgow back in the 1980s. This is when I learned all this. And I learned so much just by buying them a pint and shutting up and listening to what they had to say. And now, 55 years later, no, it's not 55. So we're talking 80s, mid-80s, that's 15, 40, oh geez, 40 odd years later, I'm sharing that information with you because it then becomes part of the collective consciousness of understanding and knowing whisky knowledge for the true enthusiast. So it's great to be in a position to share this with you. So here you have it. Big, intense, carbonised, scorched wood, burnt wood. It's burning out the superficial contamination of the bacteria and stale sherry that's been inside the cask. That's my theory. I'm not saying it actually applies to you. This is what I'm smelling, and this is what I'm tasting, and this is what I'm sharing with you. And there, malt mates, you have it. Now, Living Souls have spotted this, and they're saying, how can we present our whisky? We can't present it, or we could present it as an 18-year-old whisky, small batch or single cask. But how would the market respond? Are people ready for this? So what they've done is they've put in a big massive sweetener. They have created some theatre, some cryptic clues and some guerrilla marketing, and they've repackaged this as a 1% 3-year-old grain blended Scotch. I mean, I doubt there's even any grain in there. I think it's all single malt, frankly, but that's my personal opinion. And they say, right, now we've changed the landscape on this bottle. We can bring the price down and it's more likely to sell, and fingers crossed, if we're lucky, people will start to talk about it. And our independent bottling brand, who doesn't spend a penny in marketing, because marketing is outrageously expensive in terms of its return, hopefully people online will catch on to it and talk about it. Well, I tell you what, Living Souls, mission accomplished. And there you have it.